To give the recap of the theme for May, we had beginning new growths. This was a lot of new chapters. We had a ton of ingresses. A lot of them actually were within the last week of us recording this. So lots of new chapters, opportunities, and encouragement for transforming, doing new things, really reflecting and turning over that new leaf. So we have been facing a lot of truths and preparing ourselves, lots of training happening to sharpen those tools and really get ready for what's next. And the what's next is kind of been ongoing and happening just about now. And when it comes to the theme for June, what came through was very, very simple. One word: discovery. So that is what we are doing. We are discovering throughout June 2026. June brings something a little bit different. It's definitely eventful, but the energy is, it is a new chapter. That was one of the themes that did come up in May, was a lot of changes in the last few months in particular, really all of 2026. I know I've talked to students about this. I've experienced this firsthand. 2026 has been something. And every month has brought a little bit of different flavor. We're starting to come down from that peak of very, very high intensity that we really were reaching by March. And then we had a lot going on in April as well. But we're starting to get to the point where the planets are settling, they're finding new homes, they're going to chill, relax in there. Seeing where they are is of significance. It's not just about have they moved into a new sign, but what are those signatures? So lots to cover, but I'm feeling more optimistic about June. Again, busy, but better? Question mark. This is the planet of communication. It rules our thoughts, our thinking, how we are approaching our focus. And it enters into Cancer, which signals a shift in looking at memories. So it's like our focus is shifting towards what was in the past, nostalgia, and of course, our intuition. So you have a highly, highly intuitive sign that is Cancer, ruled by the moon. And when Mercury is there, it means that it's like those signs, those messages are coming through. You may be more interested in thinking about or talking about developing your intuition or connecting with spirituality, or by and large, empathy, caretaking, compassion. Those themes will come up. You'll want to think about them. You'll want to talk about them. And it's a great time to sharpen them. Not even just because we have the retrograde, which will encourage you to sharpen them, but in general, like you'll feel more inclined to because it becomes top of mind. That's what Mercury does. It trines the North Node. Now, the North Node in astrology represents purpose, but this is the transiting North Node. It's currently in Pisces, a fellow water sign. So a trine happens between like elements. So we're talking about Cancer, which is cardinal water, and Pisces, which is mutable water. And we have had the eclipses over the last year and going into next year, working their way through Pisces on the North Node side, Virgo on the South Node side. And as of the most recent eclipses back in February, we started to teeter. So we're having an overlapping cycle with Leo and Aquarius at the same time. So we're kind of having a double situation going on. So we will have a Pisces eclipse in August. So we will be talking about that in a couple months. The North Node is currently in Pisces. So this is a call to the collective. We're not only thinking, talking, processing in a more Cancerian way, but we are connecting to what's the general mission? What is the collective being asked to do right now? And one of those missions that we have been working on for over a year now, really a year and a half on the Pisces front, because we had an early off-cycle eclipse for a year and a half, we have been activating this new collective calling. And really, we want to ask ourselves a question: how can we be more creative, more open, and more connected to our intuition? So this will be something that we want to think about in general, and it really applies to both the ingress and the trine. We're thinking really big picture. It's not just the current moment, but are about our growth over the last year and a half, because we have more to go. Then what happens is Mercury squares Neptune. This is another intuition marker. So as you can see, we have a big, strong theme here of a lot of intuitive activations, which is very fascinating for June. So Neptune is the planet of illusion, delusion, perception, and intuition as well. It is the modern ruler of Pisces. Very, very intuitive. And it was previously in Pisces for quite some time, but earlier this year in January, it entered Aries. So that is one of the major milestones of 2026 that we have been living through for the last handful of months. A square is tension, it's lessons that need to be learned. So, our mind, which is over in Cancer, an intuitive area, it's this new journey. We are processing things a little bit differently. There's a lesson that needs to be learned either for or from this new journey that's unfolding in Neptune, moving through Aries over the next 7 years. Really, what this could be drawing forth is attention with our beliefs. So, around our skill set and how to apply that into this Aries area of our life. So, that's where you want to look at the houses being activated here. And just a week later, because we have Neptune and we have Saturn both in Aries. Saturn's going to be there for the next couple years. Neptune, triple that. So they're very close to each other. They're still in the early degrees of this sign. So that means when Mercury is moving through, it's going to square 1, and then it's going to get X amount of degrees farther, and then it's going to square Saturn, the next one in line, because they're in sequence. So when that square happens, Saturn, which is about responsibility and structure, we are being called to further restrain or maybe have some pushback on any flimsy boundaries. So if there's anything that we haven't been doing, we haven't been thinking about, we haven't been initiating or calling forward when it comes to our intuition, our development, our caretaking, our boundaries with other people, we might be asked to reset them. We have to treat ourselves as an individual worth being taken care of, whether that's in asking for help, taking care of ourselves, stepping away, whatever that might be, that there's something that we'll need to put in place here. What are we questioning about our gut? Is anything coming up with our intuition? Is there anything that we should be taking a closer look at? And what about the expectations that we have of ourselves or that we have of others? What lessons do we need to learn about asserting our individualism? We are at June 12th, so we are less than 2 weeks in to the month, and Mercury has already done a lot. So this point is when the pre-shadow period starts. So for anyone who's heard me talk about the retrograde cycle, regardless of planet, but it happens the most frequently for Mercury, we have the pre-shadow, we have the actual retrograde, and we have the post-shadow. So it's a build up. This is the ramp up to the most intense energy, and then the wind down. So the pre-shadow starts on the 12th, and then the actual retrograde begins approximately 2 weeks later on the 29th. So we just get that in right before the end of the month, which means the bulk of the actual retrograde will be happening in July, and then the post-shadow after that. And Mercury just down the road, this is like a super bonus forecast. In August, Mercury is going to touch base with Neptune and Saturn again, but instead of it being the square that we're getting in June, it's going to be a trine because it's going to be further out in signs. So it's going to be another sign over. So that will give you new perspective on whatever it is that is coming up in June. So we want to pay attention to what we are learning in those questions that we are asking ourselves about our intuition, our gut, our boundaries, our relationship with ourselves and others, because we're going to have another pass at those. It'll be a little bit of a different signature because Mercury will be in a different sign, but we're still going to be checking in on those similar signatures in a couple months' time once we get out of the retrograde. So just put a pin in that for later. Where are you experiencing communication and technology breakdowns? So that's an awareness of typical signatures of what happens when Mercury stations retrograde and when it's preparing and when it's exiting. So being observant of that, where this is cropping up in your life, because it's going to happen 2 more times. And these other activations with the squares becoming trines, it's going to pick up a little bit of that. So we may see a lot of patterns repeating. So if we note it now, it'll be easier to prepare as the other rounds come through. Separately, how can we self-advocate our boundaries more clearly? Where are we not being as direct? Simply, maybe because we're worried about hurting other people, we think we can do it, we lean on that hard shell for Cancer. But we have to be honest. How can we self-advocate? How can we say what we actually need? And maybe that need is what doesn't work for us, where we need to step away. Also, how are we tapping into our intuition? Are we holding back at all? Could we go deeper? Could we open our minds to explore a little bit more, get curious about it, not push it off as a thing that we're interested in and maybe we'll do it at some point later? Maybe now is a great time, because with the retrograde, we have experimentation, we have rounds of review. Are there any memories that are cropping up, or in general that maybe you know right now, that are in need of healing? Chiron is an asteroid that is orbiting between Saturn and Uranus. So if you're looking to place it in space, it's a ways out. It's not very close. And it represents our deepest wounds and ultimately symbolizes that through mastery, we can become a really fantastic teacher. So we can turn that wound on its head and we can help to heal others, to help them to navigate that same wound. So if you're finding other people that have the same Chiron placement as you, there's like this similar kind of like chip on their shoulder of like, oh, had to deal with the same thing as me. So it is a really deep, fundamental way to be able to relate to other people. And I did mention this earlier, but Chiron has been transiting Aries since 2018. This is a extra long, highly unusual transit. For Taurus, it's not going to be transiting as long as it was in Aries. So apparently there was a lot of work that we have needed and still will need to do, because we're not done, in the sign of Aries. So wherever that is in your chart, this is something that you will probably recognize as like, wow, have I had a lot of struggles in this area for the last 8 years. And it's pretty apparent. I know I have seen it. Once I learned, I was like, wow, does that exactly align with lots of issues I've had in this area of life repeatedly? Lots of lessons. Like, why do I keep learning the same lesson? Why do I keep learning the same lesson? And that's because that's what Chiron is teaching us, literally teaching us. So before we get to the actual ingress into Taurus, which I'll talk about in a moment, it squares Venus at the very, very final degree of Aries and Cancer, respectively. So what that tells you is Venus is at the very end of Cancer. It's hovering at the 29 and change, and Chiron is 29 and change of Aries. So they're both preparing to enter new signs within very, very short time of each other. But because they have now reached the same point, Venus moves way faster. So really, Venus's forward motion has put them in this position to form the square. And as I mentioned earlier, squares are a point of tension. They are lessons. Chiron is already infused with lessons and things that we have to learn. And Venus is focused on peace and harmony, and hopefully giving us a soft little push and support as we move into the temporary new chapter of Chiron in Taurus. Which, by the way, Venus rules. So we have like a little handoff of, hey, have fun. Have fun in a sign of my domicile. I hope you enjoy it. I wish I was there. Like that's a little bit of what Venus would be doing. So the anaretic degree, which is the name of that 29 degree, is very, very potent because you want to think about it like this. It's the final breath. It's the final sentence of a book. It's the ending. There's so much build up to that point. How is it going to end? There's this tension of, oh, now I go to the next chapter. Whoa, okay, what's it like here? So we do want to pay attention whenever there is an activation or any planets that are hovering right around the last degree, because it signals the close of a chapter. It's the end of an era, albeit in this case for Chiron temporary, because it's going to retrograde back and then do it all over again. But it's not going to go that far. So it's a tease of the end, but the final end is going to come early next year. So first you want to identify the wound, and then you want to take a moment of reflection. When this square is happening, it feels uncomfortable. We're basically poking a wound and we're looking at it, we're inspecting it, and we're saying, what do my relationships have to teach me about this wound? Are they informing it? Are they blocking it? Can I tap into them in order to help me with healing it? How can we realign our personal versus relational values? So what do you value? That's a Venus characteristic. What do you value as an individual? As in value system, principles, or the tangible, the material, things that you find valuable, versus in your relationships, what you see in others, what you value from other people. And all of that is informing, okay, how does that trace back to this wound? What's the connection there? Can we find it? And a final question is, in what ways are we lacking self-love? We need to take care of ourselves. Venus wants us to take care of ourselves, and this wound needs treating. So it might be a little bit uncomfortable in the moment, but this is going to be really important information that we're going to need later. Chiron will be circling back to this degree point when that retrograde comes later in the year. 6 days after, it takes Venus way less time to cross the border and go into the next sign, but it takes another 6 days for Chiron after the square to finally go into Taurus. And this is drawing forth vulnerability with finance, with materialism, the physical world, the buying, the selling, as well as our self-esteem. So these things are all going to come to the forefront for an extended period of time. The last time that we had a Chiron in Taurus transit was May 76 through March 77. That was their preview, which is the equivalent of what we're doing right now. This is going to be a preview for just a few months. That was a longer period of time. That was almost a year-long preview. We're not going to get that. We're going to get a much shorter preview period. And then the full concentrated run, uninterrupted, was November 83 to April 84. So as you can see, that is only like a couple years period of time, the last time that Chiron was in Taurus. And we have had Chiron in Aries for 8 years. Super, super long. A much more exaggerated period of time. When we're thinking about a Chiron in Taurus transit, the Great Depression, Irish potato famine, Holodomor, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Holodomor. It's a Ukrainian famine. So basically, thinking about resources, Taurus is about what do you have versus what do you not have. And you have wounding that's coming up. So there's this feeling of scarcity. Same thing with the Great Depression. Now I suddenly don't have money. And then it's also associated with religious nationalism. And oftentimes that is arising as a response to the feeling of lack. Then people are searching for something that feels stable. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be without, Great Depression style, but it's things that we want to watch for and that we want to be aware of. This is why this is very important as a preview, because it's retrograding will return to Taurus, and that's going to be a 6-year transit, so much longer than the one last time. So we're going to be clocking more years in here. Not as many as when it was in Aries, but still Chiron, which is representing wounding, lifelong lessons and obstacles that we keep running into over and over and over again. And this has been here for such a long time. And to support us on the way out into the next period, we have an aspect with a benefic planet, Venus, of joy, peace, harmony. And then right on the other side, we have an activation with the sun, another powerful, energizing luminary, shedding light. So the hope is here that we have a nice transition because of this bookend, that we have a little extra boost to hopefully soften or illuminate what is going on in this new chapter, because it's going to feel really different, because you may have never lived through a Chiron and Taurus, or if you have, it's been 40, 50 years. And that's a long time to be trying to remember, what did that feel like? What did that do for me? What did that do for the collective? So it's also bringing in, because the sun is in Cancer, Cancerian signatures, which we were already talking about for Mercury. So that's comfort, family, home, and intuitive insights. So that's all being woven in as well, which we're going to need a little bit of that. The overall storyline of psychic activations and reflections on our relationship with ourselves and our most valued circle. We're being asked to take a closer look at the invisible strings in our lives, to talk to our spirit team, to ask for signs, and be open to receiving answers. We want to remember that the source of our most tender spots, those creature comforts, scarcity in all forms, and desire for stability, are being called to our attention.